Well, it's great to be here. I haven't been on the campus in 20 years, as Casey was so kind to mention. My brother graduated from Harvard Law School in 1997, which is 20 years ago, and I'd been on campus with him twice. What I remember was it was an absolutely beautiful place with hardworking, smart, and inquiring students. So feel free after the end of my presentation. Let's have a nice, robust, and I look forward to it, back and forth on question and answer. My brother had the good fortune and blessings to meet his wife, Jolene Staley, here on campus. She got a master's degree and a theological degree from the Harvard Divinity School. Today they have 5 children. They started a business, which I was a part of, and one year it was a local telephone book publishing telephone directories, and we were able to transition. I was sold out of that business 1 year before Apple invented the iPhone. So I am hopeful and optimistic about our future in Illinois. And the reason I am is that in America, we the people, the citizen, is sovereign, and our rights are enshrined in our founding documents. Our founders knew that knowledge is power. And they wrote transparency into our founding documents. They understood that transparency was so powerful, they made it a part of the United States Constitution. And it's Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution, and it says that a regular statement and account of the receipts and expenditures of all public money shall be published from time to time. Today, there's a clear interpretation of Article 1, Section 9. And it is every dime, online, in real time, open the books. And that's our mission at OpenTheBooks.com. I founded OpenTheBooks.com as the nation's leading transparency portal on the unique mission to take every dime taxed and spent at every level of government across the entire country, capture it and post it online so citizens, watchdogs, media, challengers to the incumbent political class, so they can review that spending and hold the political class accountable for tax and spend decisions. Today, we've had a lot of success. We've captured 4 billion individual government transactions. Our database is comprised of nearly all federal spending that's been disclosed, all the way back to the year 2000. Federal employee salaries and bonuses all the way back to the year 2007. In the states, we have 47 out of 50 state checkbooks, most going back at least 10 years. And we've captured in 60,000 municipal units of government across the country, 15 million public employees' salaries and pensions. We can't make America great again until we make America accountable again. And I'm proud that one of the leading transparency advocates, our honorary chairman, Dr. Tom Coburn. So Coburn, if you remember, it was 2006 with then Illinois Senator Barack Obama. They, for the first time ever, sponsored the federal legislation that makes all of our work possible. They sponsored the Google Your Government Act in 2006, which George W. Bush signed into law. Coburn also, his Senate colleagues called him Dr. No, and that was because he nearly single-handedly, because of Senate rules, stopped many of the pork barrel projects that his colleagues in the Senate wanted to push through. And when they pushed something through, he wrote oversight reports. He wrote one big one every single year called his Waste Book Report. We are carrying forward Coburn's legacy. We are harnessing, for the first time in history, 3 powerful forces, and that's the Freedom of Information Act, big data technologies and computing power, and the latest in technologies. So right now, everyone here in the room can use one of our technologies. It's a free app for Apple and Android, and it's called OpenTheBooks. And we take the last 3 years of all federal spending at the local, the state, and the federal level across the entire country, and we put it into that app. So on the way over here, I just wanted to look up the City of Cambridge public employees' salaries. And the latest we have in the app is 2015. And the city manager in Cambridge makes a lot of money. He makes $360,000 a year managing the city of Cambridge. And that just so happens to out-earn every governor of the 50 states. As a matter of fact, it's 2 times more than every governor of the 50 states. Just recently in Illinois, we found that in education, there are 30,000 six-figure educators in my home state of Illinois. 20,000 of them are active teaching in the classroom, and 10,000 of them are retired on a six-figure, $100,000 plus pension. I wanted this data in the state of Massachusetts. We file 60,000 Freedom of Information Act requests every single year capturing data. So we filed with the pension system that oversees the 105 pension plans here in Massachusetts that has all the retirement annuities at every level of Massachusetts government. And the General Counsel inadvertently sent us an email which disclosed to us his strategy at forestalling our request to get that information. He said, we can slow them down, but this request is specific and it's granular, and that may not work with these guys. We can charge them a lot of money, and maybe that will work. And of course, a couple weeks later, we got our invoice for $10,000 as a retainer plus additional fees. And that is a transparency tax. You see, the sovereignty of the individual in America, we actually own the data. And we use this process of the Freedom of Information Act to go through to be able to take possession of spending data that we already own. When they charge fees, it's a tax on a property that we the people, already own. And I submit to you, it's the most important record in any state. In Illinois, who are some of those highly compensated educators? Well, one was the school district treasurer in Lyons Township. And we found that in 1 year, his salary went from $164,000 to $296,000 in 1 year. And the citizens in his district knew that wasn't right. But that was in Cook County. That's where Chicago's at. And the Cook County prosecutor cannot find public corruption anywhere. But even in Cook County, that school district treasurer was indicted. And today, I'm proud to say, he's serving 9 years in jail. Who are some of the other highly compensated Illinois educators? Well, you think that when your tax dollar goes for education, it goes to educate kids. Well, that's not exactly true in Illinois. There's a pair of watchdogs from southern Illinois that found one of our largest school districts. The tax dollars didn't go to educate kids. The tax dollars went to dogs. They built a doggy daycare center on the high school campus. The superintendent grandfathered in his doggy for lifetime benefits. And I'm proud to say that federal law enforcement just indicted him. He's retired now on the #1 all-time pension in Illinois state history of $312,000 a year, and now that pension is in jeopardy. You see, in Illinois and in New York and the 15 most populous states in the country, we have nearly accomplished our first-run data goal of putting every dime online in real time. And so in Illinois, we can fact-check the promises of politicians, even powerful politicians like Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel. Rahm Emanuel in 2011 ran for mayor on the promise to end pay-to-play, to end the historic culture of corruption in City Hall. So we fact-checked him on re-election in 2015. And here's what we found. We found that despite his executive order prohibiting city contractors from giving his campaign fund money, we found 600 city vendors gave Rahm Emanuel $7 million of campaign cash, and those vendors, through the Daley administration, through the Rahm Emanuel administration, had received $2 billion worth of city payments. Pay-to-play in Illinois was still entirely legal. That's the power of transparency. In 2013, I wrote an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal. This was after we pushed the federal checkbook to our mobile app, which I hope you download. You can see all federal spending in this zip code or any zip code across the country. I asked people to review the spending on a local, state, and federal level Start asking questions, demand answers, and hold the political class accountable for tax and spend decisions. And then I realized in my own local units of government, I had not led, I had not run an oversight investigation, I had not used that data to ask questions and demand answers. So I started it on my local junior college, which was the second largest college in Illinois. And the first thing I found is I filed a Freedom of Information Act request for the emails from the college president to the Board of Trustees because the governor was coming in to deliver the commencement address. And we found a strategy from the president of the school to the trustees to try to procure a $20 million state construction grant by offering the incumbent governor political support on his reelection. And even in Illinois, that's not right. And when we showcased that email, we stopped that grant. We found that the school, over a 7-year period, spent $600 million rebuilding the entire physical plant of the entire school. Yet they built more office space for the administrators than classroom space for the students. We found that they built an upscale French restaurant complete with a world-class wine cellar, and they hired a French sommelier. But it wasn't enough. They billed off hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of fine dining and creme brulee and filet mignon and champagne and, of course, wine against the student tuition account, against the taxpayer account, and against the student scholarship fund. And the president of the school, the comptroller of the school, and the treasurer of the school, they were fired. We found more. It developed in one of the largest scandals of a public body ever in Illinois history. We pushed about 20 stories. We stopped publishing in our own name. We engaged the Chicago Tribune. We pushed about 20 front-page news stories to the paper. We found, while the college claimed to be transparent with every dime of spending, they actually hid $100 million in an impress-style accounting scheme over the course of 6 years that was hidden from the trustees. Only the chairman of the school, the president of the school, and the accountants knew of the spending. So what possibly could be at this school in $100 million? Well, when the president went to Botswana, Africa, to shoot an African elephant, he billed off his satellite phones. We found that the chief radio station engineer traded with his own company for hundreds of thousands of dollars. And when we pushed 2 front-page newspaper stories to the Chicago Tribune, he was indicted. And I'm proud to say that 3 weeks ago, he was sentenced. He has to pay back restitution of $400,000, and he's going to serve 8 years in jail. This is the power of transparency and accountability, to limit the size, scope, and power of government. Using the power of the freedom of information, power of big data computing, power of the latest in technologies to root out and squeeze out waste, fraud, corruption, and abuse. Quick poll of the room. Who knows what who's ever heard of Dillons Rule? It's good. So we got a room of about 30, 35. We've got about 5 or 6 people that have heard of it. Who knows what it means?
Can only act with express permission from the state?
From the statutes, from the law.
Yeah, from the state statute.
Exactly. Right. You only have the power to spend if it is expressly conferred in the law. There's a watchdog group, 2 guys from Southern Illinois, literally in the middle of nowhere. When they need to go to a dry cleaner, it takes them an hour and a half to get to a dry cleaner to clean their suit. They've pioneered a watchdog model of open data. On that data, asking questions on something that doesn't look right, then demanding answers. The question comes out of Dillons Rule. Where in the law do you get the power to make that expenditure? Where is your lawful permission to spend our tax money on that? When they don't get an answer, you have to network up to 50 to 100 people into those public meetings. That creates a media event. That process in Illinois of applying Dillons Rule and open data, asking questions, networking, coupling that up with media exposure and their own exposure website, I feel is the top watchdog model in the country. They have squeezed out 277 elected and public officials in Illinois, have fled in the face of that watchdog model and those questions. This doesn't involve politics. You don't have to win an election. We, the people, can execute the law and hold the political class accountable for tax and spend decisions. So this watchdog model, if transparency and accountability, if it's successful in Illinois, this is our competitive advantage because we feel it could be successful everywhere. And that's our goal. So carrying forward Coburn's legacy on a national basis, we do quarterly oversight reports. And we started this back in 2014. So we take a tranche of federal spending in our data and we review it. And the first one we ever did was on farm subsidies in America's urban areas where there are no farms. So we took a look at farm subsidies flowing into Midtown Manhattan. We took a look at farm subsidies going into Chicago and Washington, D.C. and the Beltway. And my favorite finding is that the founder of the Nation of Islam, Reverend Minister Louis Farrakhan, he's a farmer. And he's got $327,000 worth of federal farm subsidies to prove it. In New York City, the bird watchers, the conservation group, the National Audubon Society, they took $1 million worth of federal farm subsidy, including subsidies for their upstate New York tobacco farms and their Minnesota lamb farms. So when they slaughtered a lamb, the National Audubon Society, they collected a lamb slaughter subsidy. Our next oversight report was on the Small Business Administration, the SBA, and nobody investigates the SBA. That's like investigating baseball or your mother's apple pie. We did it because in the mobile app, I noticed in my zip code in Hinsdale, Illinois, that SBA loans of $2 million went to our local Lamborghini auto dealer and $3.4 million went to our local Rolex jeweler. And where I get my haircut, my barber got $700,000. So we took a look at the whole country. And here's what we found. We found $14 billion didn't go to Main Street, the mom and pop businesses on Main Street where it's supposed to flow. Those are the people with the good ideas, and it's supposed to flow to those people that cannot find financing in the private marketplace. If you look at the loans, that's what's expressly said. But $14 billion flowed to Wall Street, not Main Street. $200 million of lending flowed to America's private country clubs, golf clubs, beach clubs, swim clubs, tennis clubs across the country. $250 million of funding went to subdivisions of the Fortune 100, our most successful and wealthiest companies, and that's not small business. $142 million of lending flowed to zip code 90210. That's Beverly Hills, California. So it was millions of dollars that flowed to their Bentley auto dealer and beauty Botox clinic and cosmetic surgeon, and $2 million flowed to Diva Limousine, who shuttles the stars and starlets in Hollywood, and $4 million of lending went to the Beverly Hills exclusive diamond broker. We found $24.2 billion of failed lending since the year 2000. In some years, 1 out of every 3 SBA loans went belly up. We have no idea where our federal tax dollars are going. We need a war on waste in this country. America needs a transparency and accountability revolution. You tell me, what government agency is running well? Could it be the EPA? So we did an oversight report of the United States Environmental Protection Agency. This was in 2015. My favorite finding is we found that the EPA bureaucrats spent $92 million on high-end luxury furniture. Fox ran that story 6 times. It was $800 pencil holders, $7,000 executive desks for the EPA bureaucrats. And probably nothing rankles a hardworking American more than thinking about his EPA bureaucrat sitting in the easy chair. Size, scope, and power of the federal government. That's really what our oversight reports go to. Peeling back the layers, seeing exactly where the money goes. 3 areas. First one, public relations. using our tax dollars to grow government. Our tax dollars for bigger budgets, higher salaries, more bonuses for as far as the eye can see. And there's 5,000 federal public relations officers employed in 202 federal agencies. But we found it's not enough. In a 7-year period, they went outside of their own PR apparatus, and they spent $2 billion with some of the largest and most successful advertising agencies in the world. And we opened up their contracts, and we found, for instance, Ketchum Advertising charges federal agencies $88 an hour for their interns. That's nearly $180,000 on a 40-hour work week per intern for an entire year. Ketchum charges their rank-and-file graphic designers $275 an hour. Booz Allen Hamilton bills out their executive for $525 an hour. That's $1.1 million per year. So when you run PR with our tax dollars, you also have the power of the federal agencies of 36,000 lawyers. Now, we took a look at that. There's 12,000 federal lawyers working at the Department of Justice pursuing crime and criminals. And there's 24,000 federal lawyers outside of the DOJ. So when companies and business and nonprofits complain about federal regulation, you've got an army, a division of 24,000 federal lawyers enforcing that entire regulatory code. And after grabbing legal power, we found the feds amassing firepower. So we did a comprehensive study over a 7-year period, and we found outside of the military, outside of the Department of Defense, we found 67 federal agencies purchased $1.5 billion worth of guns, ammunition, and military-style equipment. And Dr. Tom Coburn, on the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal, in a premium placement, launched our report in a piece entitled, "Why Does the IRS Need Guns?" You see, we found that the IRS spent $11 million for their 2,000 special agents that are allowed to carry AR-15s. We found Health and Human Services spent millions of dollars on guns and ammunition. They have actually, inside the Beltway, a training facility for their 200 special agents that are trained to carry the same heavy weaponry as our Special Forces military warriors, and they're trained by the same vendors and contractors that also train our Special Forces warriors. We found that since the year 2004, Homeland Security purchased 1.4 billion bullets, and 500 million of those bullets were hollow point bullets. We found that Homeland Security procured from the United States military 4,700 bayonets. And a bayonet is an offensive weapon designed to bleed your enemy and kill them. When we showcased our findings, we were immediately called by the House Committee on Government and Oversight, Jason Chaffetz's committee at the time, to Washington, D.C. to privately brief the committee, and a week later, all of our findings were used in a committee hearing with Homeland Security in the hot seat. Chaffetz extended our arguments, and he even asked the Director of Homeland Security, how did you lose 1,000 weapons out of your gun locker, including an Uzi and a grenade launcher? Size, scope, and power of the federal government. That's why we need transparency. That's why we need a war on waste. That's why we need to bring accountability to our government at all levels. Oftentimes our data gives regular people, news media, politicians, simply the proper information to debate the salient issue of the day. So on January 25th of this year, when President Donald Trump issued an executive order threatening to cut funding from America's sanctuary cities, nobody knew what was at stake. By February 2nd, we had the answer at OpenTheBooks.com. We made CNN, NBC, Fox News. The 106 sanctuary cities in the last fiscal year received total federal funds of $27 billion. So think about this. These one-off lawsuits on a couple $1 million for the DOJ law enforcement grants that's been filed by Mayor Rahm Emanuel and probably out of Los Angeles and San Francisco and some of these other communities. These lawsuits are simply being filed on such low amounts because the real battle is for the other amount of money, the large amount of money, the tens of billions of dollars. For instance, in the city of New York, it's $8 billion at all levels of federal funding that flowed through the city of New York last year, and that's $900 per man, woman, and child in the city of New York. One of my favorite reports, and I think this report will resonate with each one of you here in the room today, was the report we came out with last April. We broke preliminary findings on the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal in a piece that James Pearson and Naomi Riley Schaefer wrote entitled, "The Ivy League Doesn't Need Taxpayer Help." What we did is we took a look at 6 years worth of United States government subsidies, special tax treatment, and direct payments on contracts and grants into the 8 schools of the Ivy League over a 6-year period. And we added it up, and it was $42 billion. On contracts and grants alone, contract and grant making, the Ivy League now is more federal contractor than it is educator. On undergraduate student tuition over that period, the 8 schools of the Ivy League collected $22 billion worth of student tuition. At the same time, they collected on federal contracts and grant making $25 billion. To put that in perspective on how much money that is, that over the same period of time, if the Ivy League was a state government, it would outrank 16 states on the receipt of federal money. This is despite the fact that in the aggregate, the Ivies have $120 billion of endowment. And to break that down into the equivalents, that is $2 million in the equivalent per undergraduate student. We did the math and war-gamed out how long it would take if the entire endowment could defray all undergraduate student tuition. And it's the equivalent of 50 years of free tuition for every single undergraduate in the Ivy League without any additional gifts into the endowment. It's a massive amount of money. At the current rates of growth, 20 years from now, the Ivies will have a $1 trillion endowment. And they've gamed the system for personal gain. 47 administrators in the Ivy League made over $1 million last year. 2 of them in a 5-year period made over $25 million in a 5-year period. And that's not non-for-profit. That's a for-profit compensation plan. So we've called on the Ivy League to lighten up on taxpayers and start raising money for their projects in the private sector and start paying more of their own way. What is the compelling public purpose argument to compel working and middle-class taxpayers to fork over more of their hard-earned money to the Ivy League? That's a question that they actually have not answered yet. But upstate New York Congressman Tom Reed, he has vowed to hold hearings in House Ways and Means on the issue, and we hope to get an answer there. I'm going to close with this story because I think it demonstrates the power of transparency in one of the most egregious stories in one of the most powerful federal agencies. So if you remember back in 2014, at Veterans Affairs, the scandal broke. We didn't break the scandal at OpenTheBooks.com. The culture at Veterans Affairs was so corrupt, so corrosive, that a retired doctor, Dr. Sam Foote, out of the Phoenix facility, he blew the whistle after he was already out the door retired. And he said the books are cooked. Millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars over the years worth of ill-gotten gains on bonuses were paid out because the books looked like no veterans were waiting for a doctor's appointment. And that was the formula. Without wait lines, bonuses were paid. But Foote said veterans were dying and the waits were extreme. And that was the scandal in 2014. At the Phoenix facility, up to 40 veterans died while waiting to see a doctor. Tom Coburn did an oversight report when he was still in the Senate. He found 1,000 veterans died while waiting to see a doctor across the entire country. We took a look at the Phoenix facility, and all of our data started going to USA Today, where we made a big national impact that gave a lot of context to the story. We found that Phoenix actually employed 3,600 employees, but only 227 of them were doctors. You can't provide basic medical care for veterans if you're committed to funding a big healthcare bureaucracy. And that was what was going on. Veterans were dying, sick veterans, because they couldn't get in to see a doctor. There just weren't enough doctors out of 3,600 employees. We kept fact-checking that story over the years. Congress threw tens of billions of dollars at the VA. The VA added 60,000 additional people to payroll over the next 3 years. But they only hired 5,600 new doctors, while still 500,000 veterans waited longer than 30 days to see a doctor. Now, hopefully, with the new administration, when we review the numbers next year, things will start changing. But with all of the scandal, with all of the slow walking of reform, that's the story of the growth of bureaucracy at the VA. We analyzed the VA checkbook in the summer of 2016, and we found during this period when the suicide calls for veterans were being answered by voicemail, when it was 3 years on an appeal of a health care claim all the way to Washington, D.C., and that process was called the Hamster Wheel. While the VA was failing at its core mission of providing basic health care to veterans, they spent $20 million on a high-end art collection. So it was 27-foot Christmas trees costing $21,000. It was sculptures priced like 5-bedroom homes. We found in California a VA center that serves blind veterans spent $700,000 on 2 sculptures. And sick veterans that are blind, they can't see a fancy sculpture. Every veteran deserves to simply see a doctor. So this story went to Good Morning America, ABC World News Tonight. It was picked up by Senate Judiciary Chairman Chuck Grassley, who wrote a 3-page oversight letter to Robert McDonald at the VA. And within 34 days of Good Morning America airing our story, the VA actually apologized for the spending and instituted new rules to stop the abuse on a go-forward basis. And that is the power of transparency. That is the power of fighting on hard facts. Now, $20 million, before we even aired that story, we didn't even know if that was enough money to create a big scandal. But that exactly is the Coburn model. What's the Coburn model? He was the guy that stood in the well of the United States Senate and battled the bridge to nowhere. While the Republican incumbent Ted Stevens from Alaska, the powerful senator, barreled down the aisle with fists clenched and a red face and told the freshman Coburn to get off the floor. But Coburn didn't move. He brought his amendment forward, and he lost it that night. He only got 16 votes that first night. But he knew the American people, when they woke up the next morning, when they read the papers, he knew he'd eventually win the issue. And that's exactly what happened. The bridge to nowhere now. Everybody knows it as the example of waste. And they used that to end earmarks as we know them. So that's what we need to do as a movement. We need to start fighting on hard facts. And when we engage on these subjects, when we show exactly what's going on, when we fight, we win. Thank you.